In this episode of The Russell Brown Show, I want to talk about a distorted view of a great city. Because in this tutorial, I'm going to be talking about removing lens distortion from, in this case, a GoPro Hero 3 image. And of course, this image was taken by Jeff Engelhart in Seattle. He took this photograph using a DJI Phantom quadcopter. And in this project, I want to demonstrate how to remove the distortion in several different ways. Now, when Jeff initially started this project, he tried to apply my lens profile to this image, which was designed for the GoPro Hero 3. And the results looked like this. As you can see in this image, it's distorted the image so that the horizon looks great, but it's also distorted the image so that anything near the edge looks over-distorted. Those are the results of applying a lens profile across an entire image, so the distortion will take place everywhere within the image. In this project, I want to demonstrate how you can isolate the distortions to the exact areas where you want them to be within your image. And to do that, we're going to use a great feature called adaptive wide angle. Now let's go right over here to Jeff's original image, and I want to show you some of the ways that I've used adaptive wide angle here inside of Adobe Photoshop CC to correct for different distortions within the image. I'm going to click here in Adobe Bridge and show you some variations. Here in the second one, I'm going to straighten the Space Needle, but I'm going to leave the rest of the image alone. Now that's pretty nice. So before and then after, simply distorting that section of the image and straightening that area so that the Space Needle does not have this curve to it. Okay, that's pretty interesting. Let's take this to the next step. Again, using adaptive wide angle, and I'll show you these in just a minute, I can then go in and rotate the image. Not only do I remove the distortion to the Space Needle, but now I'm rotating the horizon. Next, let's take this even farther. Let's start to remove some of the distortion in the horizon. Just like that. But I still have not removed all the distortion. And in this final shot right here, I've gone through and removed most of the distortion in the image by progressively adding more and more detail within my adaptive wide angle process. Okay, let's go right back to the beginning and discuss the basics so that you too can experiment with different ways to apply different adaptive wide angle distortions to get the results you're looking for. Because there's no true correct answer in all of these. It's just having the ability to experiment with all of them. Here is the original image. I'm going to go ahead and open that here inside of Adobe Photoshop. Now, this is where it starts. I first make a smart object out of my original image in this case because it came from the GoPro Hero 3 as a JPEG image. I'm going to right-click here on the image and convert it to a smart object. That's your first and most important step in this process of working with adaptive wide angle because it makes this process non-destructive. Once I've done that, then I can go up here to my filter menu and down to adaptive wide angle right here. Now this is where it gets really, really interesting because we can now distort this image in unique areas and leave everything else the way it was. This is how it starts. First, adjust your scale so you can see your entire image. And in some cases, you'll notice some odd behaviors as you can see here to the edges. Let's remove that first. I scaled it down so I can see my entire image. Then I'm going to adjust my crop factor. Watch what happens when we adjust this. If I move this over to the right, we're starting to remove the distortion to the image. What I want to do is bring this all the way back to the least amount of distortion as possible, as you see here. Then I'm going to adjust the focal length until even more distortion is removed. So I essentially end up with my original image with no or little distortion along the edges. Now I'm going to scale it back up a bit and let's get to work. The first thing we want to do is go right up here to the upper left-hand corner, and we want to set up the constraints for this image. Notice over here to the right that my correction type is fisheye. I should have brought that up earlier, but this is an important factor in getting your best results. With fisheye selected, I can go in and create my own settings. Check this out. I'm going to look for a distorted region in the image. In this case, it's the Space Needle. I'm going to click and drag from the tip of the Space Needle down to its base. In this case, I'm looking for an object that I can use as reference. I could use the horizon, but I'm going to go ahead and use the Space Needle in this project. Notice that the curvature of this line does not match the Space Needle. But if we're in the fisheye mode and we draw this line, we can then click in the center and then move this center point over until it goes right down the middle of the Space Needle. Did you see how I did that? I'm moving it over until it goes right down the center of the Space Needle, and then I let go. This process will set up the exact values needed to profile this image. In other words, we're creating a profile for this image based upon that curvature and the fact that we've moved this point, as you see here. So now any other lines I draw should match the contours in the image. Let's test this. If I click on the horizon and move to the left, notice that it starts to match the curvature of the horizon. It's following this curvature because we set up the profile for this, once again, by selecting this first line and moving the center point, which essentially sets the focal length for this particular lens, in this case, the GoPro Hero 3. So now that we have this set, we can go through and add additional control points. But as you saw in my first project, I merely wanted to straighten the Space Needle, and my project's done. You might also go through, for example, and adjust the top of the Space Needle, in this case, by clicking and dragging across like this. Notice how it straightened out the distortion in the top of the Space Needle. So those are the basics. I'm going to continue through this project and apply more constraint tool lines to the image to continually alter and change this until it has the amount of distortion that I want within the image. Now check this out. If you hold down the Shift key when you draw a line, for example, for a horizon, it will then constrain that to a perfect horizontal. If you hold down the Shift key and draw a line vertically, it will constrain that to a perfect vertical. Now let me demonstrate how I've used that in this project, because as you saw earlier, I wanted to rotate the image. I'm going to delete that line and draw a new line, because now I'm going to draw a line that goes right down the middle, hold down my Shift key, and I now have a vertical. But I can adjust this vertical by moving my cursor right over this point that I'm circling right here. I see a new icon appear that allows me to rotate this. So you can now rotate the orientation of this line until, in this case, my horizon rotates around, so it's a little bit more symmetrical, more like a globe in the distance. And of course, the angle of the Space Needle is changing, but our constraint line is still in position that we drew earlier, which makes sure that it's perfectly straight. So there you have it. Continue working through your image and straighten things by holding down the Shift key, or simply draw a line to straighten an area without the Shift key. Both these techniques will work as you continue to work on your project. You can, of course, even go in and adjust the horizon, as we saw earlier, simply by drawing a line on the horizon and letting go. Or if you've finished drawing the line, of course, you can right-click on any line you've drawn with the constraint tool. As you see here, I'm right-clicking on that line, and I can change it to a horizontal. You could continue to add additional horizontal constraint lines. In this case, I'm holding down the Shift key and dragging once again to then straighten your horizon as you see here. So it's a progressive process. When you have something you like, of course, be sure and scale the image up here to the right. Then use the Move tool here to the left, and then reposition your image. But in general, I like to scale it up as far as I can, and then I'm going to click OK. Now the final step, of course, is to go in with content-aware fill and fill in those areas. I'm going to assume that you know how to fill in areas with content-aware fill. Of course, you select the areas that you want to fill, and I use the Shift key and the Delete key to then fill those areas automatically in with content-aware fill. Okay, just to review our whole process once again, back to Adobe Bridge. We started with an original image here from Jeff Engelhardt. We did not like the distortion that we got in this case when using the standard lens profile for this camera, but instead we went through with the new adaptive wide angle feature to slowly and progressively add more and more adjustments until we eventually end up with something that might look like this. But to tell you the truth, I really love the simpler adjustments, where in this case I just take out the distortion found in the Space Needle as you see here. I really like these results. There you have it, some tips and techniques for removing distortion from a really wide angle lens like the GoPro Hero 3, and in this case for aerial photography. Thanks so much to Jeff Engelhardt for loaning me the image for this project. Give this technique a try.